You are a useless idiot! How dare you look at me, you fool! From today, you are fired, and I don't want to see you again in this street, let alone of this house.
He rushed to her house that morning, excited, nervous, ready to introduce the man who raised him. But before he could knock, he froze, because what he saw changed everything. His fiancée, the woman he trusted, the woman he planned to marry, stood in front of an elderly gateman, his father, and slapped him across the face. Not out of fear, not by mistake, but out of arrogance. She cursed him, called him useless, then shoved him aside like he was nothing. She didn't know the old man she humiliated was the same man her fiancé loved more than life. She didn't know she had just struck the father of the man she wanted to spend forever with. He wasn't supposed to arrive early. She never imagined he was standing right there watching. In one moment, her true character was revealed, and his entire world was shattered. Welcome to Ocean of Tales. Kindly like, comment, and subscribe on this channel. We will be notifying you when we drop a new video. Don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. Now, he's not just a man in love. He's a son with a decision that will break someone's heart. Because in this story, you don't just slap a stranger. You destroy a future you never knew depended on him. She didn't know anyone was watching. She didn't know what that single, careless moment would cost her. All she saw was the gateman, old, slow, and standing slightly in her way as she tried to drag in shopping bags. Her irritation was already boiling from the morning's stress. So when he bent too late to open the gate, when he muttered an apology she didn't care to hear, something dark snapped inside her. She raised her hand, and without thinking, without pausing, without weighing consequences, she struck him across the face. A slap meant to correct, but it corrected nothing. He staggered back, not because the slap was strong, but because the humiliation cut deeper than pain. His cap fell. His glasses shook. His silence grew heavy. For a second, their eyes met. Hers blazing with anger she thought was justified, his filled with something she could not understand. Disappointment mixed with a grief too old to name. His jaw tightened, not from pride, but from restraint. She hissed and walked past him, believing she had put a useless man in his place. She had no idea that she had just slapped her destiny into a storm. The gate closed behind her like a warning bell she did not hear. Neighbors who witnessed the scene froze, stunned by the boldness of the act. An elderly woman across the road paused mid-sweep, whispering, this girl done enter trouble." A boy on a bicycle stopped pedaling. Even the Okada man at the corner shook his head. They all knew the gateman, knew his humility, his quiet dignity, his gentle way of greeting everyone. What they saw today wasn't just disrespect, it was an omen. A storm gathering silently around an ignorant woman. Inside the compound, she continued grumbling, dusting her palms like someone who had just fought a worthy battle. She rehearsed in her mind how she would narrate it to her fiancé later, how she put that lazy gateman in his place, how she taught him a lesson. She imagined her fiancé praising her boldness. She imagined herself as the queen of the home, commanding respect. She imagined everything except the truth.
She didn't know who she had slapped.
She didn't know that she had just struck the father of the man she wanted to marry. In the security room, the old man sat down slowly, the pain of the moment spreading through his chest. But not the physical pain he had endured worse in life. It was the heartbreak of realizing that his son, his only son, was planning to marry someone who could treat an elder with such cruelty. He removed his glasses, wiped the lens carefully, and muttered a prayer under his breath. Not for himself. Not even for his son. But for the young woman who had no idea how deeply she had just wounded her future. A single tear rolled down his cheek. Quiet, invisible, dignified. He touched his cheek where the slap landed and let out a long, tired sigh. He thought of the years he spent away from his son, building a life from nothing. He thought of the sacrifices he made, sleepless nights, dangerous jobs, humiliation swallowed silently, all so that his boy would grow into a man with choices. This job, this Gateman disguise, was not a punishment. It was a decision, a test of humility for the woman his son loved. And she had failed it in the most spectacular way. Without knowing it, she had failed the one exam that decided her future. Outside, life continued as if nothing had happened, but everything had. The wind shifted. The compound felt heavier. The gate that once stood as a quiet entrance now felt like a witness waiting to testify. And the old man, still sitting in the small room, closed his eyes and whispered, "God, show my son the truth today." He wasn't angry. He wasn't vengeful. He was simply heartbroken. Because sometimes destiny doesn't shout. It slaps, softly, painfully, reminding you that character, not beauty, not wealth, not charm, is the real foundation of a home. And today, her character had spoken louder than her voice ever could. He wasn't supposed to come home at that hour. His meeting had ended early, and he wanted to surprise his fiancée with lunch from her favorite restaurant. He drove with a smile, humming softly, imagining her excitement when she saw him. He believed she was kind, respectful, warm-hearted. He believed she was everything his late mother would have prayed for. He believed until he reached the gate. The moment he stepped out of his car, the atmosphere felt wrong, heavy, unsettled, carrying whispers he couldn't place. Something had happened, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. He approached the gate slowly, frowning when he saw neighbors staring discreetly, exchanging looks they quickly hid when he made eye contact. He noticed the old gateman's cap lying on the ground. That alone was strange. The man was always neat, always precise. He picked it up, dusted it instinctively, and called out, "Baba?" His voice echoed slightly, meeting no response. The silence felt too sharp, too cold. Then he saw him, sitting quietly in the security room, shoulders slumped in a way that terrified him instantly. His father wasn't a man who slumped. Something was wrong. He hurried in, heart hammering. "Baba, what happened?" The old man didn't speak immediately. He simply looked at his son, with eyes heavy with the kind of pain that warned, "Prepare yourself." The young man felt a chill run through him. This wasn't sickness. This wasn't exhaustion. This was heartbreak. He knelt beside him, holding his hands like he used to as a child. "Talk to me, please." But the old man stayed silent, as if speaking would tear open a wound too fresh. That silence scared the son more than any words could. Outside, the neighbors' whispers grew bolder now that the sun had arrived. He could hear soft murmurs drifting through the compound, murmurs filled with shock, pity, and disappointment. The young man stepped outside again, scanning faces. What happened here? No one answered directly. An elderly woman looked at him with sorrow. A teenager bit his lip, looking away. A man at the corner muttered, "It's not my mouth they will use to cause fight." The puzzle pieces were scattering around him, but no one would arrange them. Something had gone horribly wrong. His heart raced as he replayed the scene. His father's cap on the floor, the neighbor's stares, the heavy silence, the unsettled air. Then he heard it, the soft creak of the upstairs door. He looked up and saw her, his fiancée, walking out casually, adjusting her hair like nothing significant had happened. She smiled when she saw him, beginning to call his name. But that smile, the smile he once adored, suddenly felt strange, fragile, misplaced. His instincts screamed that she was the missing piece of this terrible puzzle, and he was about to learn why. She walked down the stairs, unaware of the storm building beneath her feet. "Baby, you're home early," she said brightly. But he didn't respond. He was staring too deeply, too intensely, looking for clues in her expression. She noticed the cap in his hand. Oh, that useless Gateman. She didn't even finish her sentence before realizing she had said the wrong thing.
His face changed.
His eyes hardened. His jaw locked. Her words had lit a match she didn't know she was holding. The neighbors exhaled sharply, recognizing the moment everything would crack open. He didn't shout. He didn't shake. He just asked one haunting, steady question. "What did you do to him?" And at that moment, with the world watching silently, her entire future hung on the honesty of her next breath. The compound felt too quiet, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for a truth that would redraw every boundary of love, loyalty, and character. The young man still held his father's cap in his hand, gripping it so tightly his knuckles whitened. The cap was old, faded from years of sun, weather, and honest labor, a symbol of humility and dignity. To him, it was priceless. To her, it was useless. He swallowed hard, the question still hanging in the air. What did you do to him? But she didn't understand the weight of what she had done. She didn't know she was standing on the edge of her own downfall. Instead of remorse, she laughed nervously, crossing her arms like someone defending their pride rather than their conscience. Babe, you're overreacting. It's just the gateman. He was moving too slow, and I warned him before. These old men. She didn't get to finish. Her fiancé turned his face away for a moment, as if the words physically hurt him. The neighbors watching shook their heads, not just at what she said, but at what she was too blind to see. Because the truth was about to break open. He headed back into the small security post, motioning her to follow. Her steps were reluctant now, uneasy, like she felt the edges of something unraveling. Inside, the old man sat quietly, the same slumped posture, the same wounded silence. But when his son stepped in, he straightened slightly, trying to look strong despite the ache in his spirit and the sting on his face. Baba, the young man said softly, kneeling beside him again. Please talk to me. The fiancé froze in the doorway. Baba? She blinked. Then blinked again. No, she must have heard wrong. Why are you calling him that? She asked, her voice trembling with confusion. He's just the gateman. This time, the neighbors couldn't contain themselves. A few gasped. One woman placed her hand over her chest. A man muttered, she doesn't even know. His father finally raised his eyes, tired, red, filled with disappointment, but also a quiet, regal strength she had never noticed. When he spoke, his voice cracked. My daughter, I am not just a gateman. The fiancé's breath hitched. The old man turned to his son. I didn't want her to know yet. I wanted to meet her properly. I wanted to see the kind of woman my son planned to marry, not as a rich man, not as a chief, but as a simple worker. Her eyes widened. Rich man? Chief? Father? She looked at her fiancé, whose face was now cold, distant, unreadable. The father continued. I wanted to know if she would respect me without knowing my status, if she would treat me like a human being. A beat of silence. Then another. She took a shaky step backward. The truth slammed into her chest. The old man she slapped, the man she insulted, the man she called useless, was her fiancé's father, a respected chief, a wealthy landowner, a man of honor.
Her knees felt weak.
The young man finally spoke, his voice quiet but laced with pain. You slapped my father. Not the gateman. Not an elderly man. Not a stranger. His father. Every word hit her like thunder. She covered her mouth, breathing rapidly, her arrogance evaporating, replaced by a rising terror. The foundation of her future, marriage, respect, acceptance, was collapsing under the weight of a single action. Her fiancé stepped away from her. His father looked at her one last time, eyes filled with both sorrow and wisdom. Character, he said softly, is who you are when you think no one is watching. And in that moment, she realized the truth too late. She hadn't just slapped a man. She had slapped her destiny. The young man stepped out of the gatehouse like someone walking out of a nightmare, his breath uneven, his heartbeat unsteady. The world around him suddenly felt different, colder, sharper, stripped of the illusions he had wrapped himself in for years. He stared at the woman he once imagined a future with, and for the first time, he truly saw her. Not the smile she wore at fancy dinners, not the soft voice she used in public, but the raw, unfiltered truth hiding behind her polished exterior, the arrogance, the entitlement, the quiet cruelty she never thought anyone noticed. And the realization cut deeper than any slap could. He walked past her slowly, as if each step was carrying the weight of memories he no longer recognized. His mind replayed moments he had dismissed. The way she once sneered at a waitress for mixing up her drink, the sarcastic laugh she gave when a driver struggled with heavy bags, the impatient tapping of her fingers whenever anyone of lower status spoke too slowly. Back then, he told himself she was just stressed or tired or misunderstood. But now, those excuses felt like lies he told his own heart. As he turned to face her again, the clarity in his eyes made her chest tighten with dread, hinting at a confrontation she was not prepared for. She stepped toward him, reaching out as if to touch his arm, but he moved back instinctively. The distance stung her more than his silence. He watched her the way someone watches a stranger, unsure, cautious, wounded. Her lips trembled, forming explanations she herself didn't believe. Her voice came out soft, shaky, desperate to rewrite the scene he had witnessed. But every word she uttered only deepened the ache in his chest, because the woman standing before him no longer matched the woman he had loved in his mind. The mismatch created a painful gap between illusion and reality, widening with each passing second. She pleaded for him to listen, insisting she didn't mean it, claiming she was just angry, that he provoked her, that these workers sometimes do too much. Each excuse felt like another slap, not to his father this time, but to the values he held sacred. Respect, kindness, humanity, the very qualities he believed she carried. Now, those beliefs were dissolving like mist, leaving only the chilling possibility that he had fallen in love with a version of her that never existed. Her words grew weaker as she noticed his unreadable expression, a calmness that frightened her more than rage ever could. Inside his mind, questions battled for space. How long had she been this person? Was she always like this? Or had he ignored signs because he was too eager to love? His heart felt like a house shaking from its foundation, windows rattling, walls cracking, yet still standing for now. But the more he searched his memories, the more he saw pieces he had brushed aside. Her subtle superiority, her lack of empathy, her obsession with appearances and status. Suddenly, it felt as if the universe had removed a blindfold he didn't know he was wearing, exposing truths he could no longer unsee. She tried again to defend herself, her tone rising with frustration and fear. She painted the slap as a mistake, a moment of stress, a misunderstanding. But behind her words, he heard the echo of who she truly was, someone who showed kindness only when it benefited her, someone who believed respect was earned by wealth, not humanity. The old version of her, the soft-speaking, well-behaved woman she packaged for him, felt like a performance now, a carefully rehearsed script. And he was finally realizing he had been sitting in the audience, clapping for a character instead of a person. He took one deep breath, the kind that signals something inside is broken, quietly, cleanly, permanently. His voice, when it finally came, was calm but heavy with disappointment. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He didn't insult. He simply told her the truth she wasn't prepared to hear, that love built on illusion cannot survive the weight of reality. As he turned away, she felt her stomach twist with panic, sensing that she was no longer fighting for an apology, but for a future slipping out of her hands. And for the first time, she wondered whether a single moment of arrogance had cost her the one thing she thought she had secured forever. A sharp breeze swept through the estate that afternoon, carrying with it the leftover tension from the morning's chaos. Residents stepping out for errands paused, glancing toward the gatehouse with curious eyes. Something had happened. The air felt too charged, too uneasy, too full of unspoken electricity. The slap, though given hours earlier, still echoed in the minds of those who witnessed it. A few neighbors lingered by their balconies, watching, whispering, trying to piece together the fragments of drama they'd seen. And like all communities with too much time and too many mouths, the story began to grow legs. A woman watering her flowers told her friend that the fiancé, nearly threw the gateman to the ground. By the time the friend repeated it across the street, the story had changed. Now she slapped him twice and cursed his entire generation. Another neighbor leaned on her balcony railing, shaking her head as she whispered that the girl had always seemed proud, always walking like she owned the entire estate. The more people talked, the more flavor the story gained. Some added spice. Some added salt. Some added pepper that didn't even exist. And with each version, her reputation began to crack like dry clay under pressure. Inside her living room, she paced anxiously, feeling the weight of eyes she couldn't see but could almost hear. Every footstep from outside sounded like judgment. Every laugh from across the compound felt like mockery. She peeked through her curtains and caught two teenagers pointing in her direction, their expressions a mix of shock and excitement. Her heart dropped. She had always loved attention, but not this kind. Not attention that felt like arrows aimed at her dignity. The walls of her house, once symbols of comfort, now felt like a cage closing in. At the gate, the father sat quietly, his cheeks still marked faintly from the slap. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't defend himself. He simply wiped his eyes and continued working, his silence saying more than words ever could. But silence, in a place hungry for drama, is like gasoline. People rushed to fill in the blanks. Some said he begged her not to hit him. Others said he fainted after the slap. Some swore they heard her threaten to fire him. The truth didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the spectacle, and she had unknowingly become the star of the wrong kind of show. Her phone buzzed nonstop as messages from acquaintances poured in. Some asked what happened politely, pretending to be concerned, but secretly burning with curiosity. Others didn't bother to hide it. They demanded explanations, screenshots, details. A former friend sent a voice note that began with, "Babe, I don't want to gossip," but she pressed mute before the sentence finished. Her chest tightened. She felt surrounded.
Exposed.
Stripped of the elegant image she spent years crafting. The world was suddenly too loud, too close, too cruel. And all because of one impulsive moment she couldn't undo. By evening, the estate WhatsApp group buzzed with messages. Someone uploaded a blurry video taken from a balcony, not of the slap, but of her arguing with the gateman afterward. Even without context, it painted her as arrogant, aggressive, heartless. Her name trended within the small community like wildfire. People she barely knew had become analysts of her character. Mothers used her as an example to warn their daughters about pride. Fathers shook their heads and muttered that beauty without respect is useless. With every passing hour, her image twisted further into a cautionary tale she could no longer control. As night fell, she sat alone on her bed, the silence of her room clashing with the noise of the world outside. The whispers grew into a storm she couldn't escape. Each rumor felt like a needle. Each exaggerated detail felt like a punch. She wanted to scream, to explain, to defend herself. But explanations don't travel as fast as gossip. She realized, with a sinking feeling, that her true punishment had already begun. Not from the fiancé, not from the father, but from the community's judgment. And she wondered, trembling, whether this was only the beginning of her fall, or if she had already reached the point of no return. Below is Section 6 written to your exact specifications. 200 words total, 7 paragraphs, 100 words per paragraph. Each paragraph starts with a fresh action scene, sensory-rich, cinematic, rising tension, ends with cliffhangers. A cold silence settled inside her living room as she paced back and forth, wiping her clammy palms against her skirt. The day had dragged itself into evening, yet the shame from the morning refused to fade. She kept rehearsing explanations, excuses, anything that might soften what she'd done. But deep down, she sensed something irreversible shifting in her life. When she heard a soft knock on the door, her breath stilled. She rushed to fix her hair, her clothes, her trembling voice, unaware that the man on the other side had already made a life-changing decision. The fiancé stepped into the room with a heavy stillness that felt colder than rain. He didn't look around. He didn't smile. He didn't open his arms to hold her the way he usually did. Instead, he stood near the doorway, as if coming any closer would stain him with something he couldn't wash off. His eyes held an exhaustion she had never seen before. Not anger, not shouting. Something far worse, disappointment so deep it looked like heartbreak carved into bone. She tried to step forward, but his subtle flinch froze her feet to the floor. Something was terribly wrong. Across the room, he placed the flowers he had brought earlier on the table. The same flowers meant to celebrate a joyful introduction. Their bright colors felt mocking now, almost cruel. He stared at them for a long, suffocating moment, as though realizing how quickly happiness can rot in the hands of the wrong person. She finally whispered his name, but the sound cracked midair, fragile and unsure. He didn't respond. His silence echoed louder than shouting, stretching through the room until even the walls seemed to lean in to listen. He finally lifted his gaze, and the look in his eyes made her chest tighten. It wasn't hatred, it was mourning, like someone grieving a future they had to bury before it even began. He slowly reached into his pocket, and her stomach twisted when she saw the glint of metal in his hand. The engagement ring. The ring that once sparkled with promises now looked dull under the weight of reality. He held it gently, almost sadly, as though letting it go would break him too. She covered her mouth, a soft whimper escaping. She wasn't ready for what he was about to say. Calmly, too calmly, he explained that marriage is more than love, beauty, or chemistry. It is character. It is compassion. It is how you treat people when no one is watching. His voice never rose, yet each word cut deeper than a scream. He described how he watched her raise her hand at the old man who gave him life. How his heart shattered seeing her strike the person he had hoped she would one day call father. His voice trembled only once, when he said he could never unsee that moment. Never.
Not in this lifetime.
Tears streamed down her cheeks as she dropped to her knees, begging for forgiveness, pleading that she didn't know, insisting it was a mistake. But he shook his head slowly, painfully. He told her that the problem wasn't ignorance, it was arrogance. If she could treat a stranger with such cruelty, then she could destroy anyone. He didn't accuse her. He didn't insult her. He simply spoke with the clarity of a man who had finally seen the truth beneath the surface. When he gently placed the ring in her hand, her entire body shook. This was real. This was happening. He stepped back toward the door, pausing for one final breath that held the weight of everything they could have been. Without turning around, he whispered that love without respect is a ticking bomb, and she had just lit the fuse herself. Then he walked away, leaving her kneeling on the floor, clutching a ring that no longer belonged to her. The moment the door closed, the silence broke over her like a storm. And as she collapsed into sobs, one terrifying thought rose above everything else. If this was only the engagement breaking, what would break next? The gatehouse felt colder than usual that evening, shadows stretching long across the dusty floor. The old man sat on the creaking wooden chair, head bowed, hands clasped tightly. The faint marks of her hand still tingled on his skin, a physical reminder of the morning's humiliation. He closed his eyes, letting the sting fade, but the ache in his heart remained. Each breath was heavy, weighted with memories of sacrifice he never asked anyone to acknowledge. Outside, the estate buzzed with whispers and laughter, unaware of the quiet storm raging in the small room at the edge of their world. His fingers traced the worn edges of the ledger on the table, the small record of wages and expenses that had kept him working tirelessly for his son's dreams. He thought of every early morning and late night, every denied meal, every favor given without expectation, every time he endured scorn to protect a future that wasn't even his. And now, all that effort seemed invisible, swallowed by the cruelty of a single slap. The irony stung. The world saw him as a servant, but his life had been nothing but service, love disguised as labor. Outside, the sounds of the estate continued, heels clicking on marble, laughter spilling from the garden, cars rolling into the driveway. Each sound reminded him how small he had become in the eyes of those he protected. Yet, In his heart, pride wrestled with sorrow. He had raised a son to greatness, only to be dismissed in silence, mistaken for nothing. A single act of disrespect felt like a mirror reflecting society's obsession with status. And still, he said nothing, letting patience be his shield. A gust of wind rattled the gate, carrying with it fragments of the day's chaos, the whispers, the gossip, the unseen judgment. He wiped his face with the back of his sleeve, trying to hide the glimmer of tears. Not because he felt defeated, but because he feared his son would see him broken. For a man who had spent a lifetime silently bearing burdens, the challenge was now internal: how to endure humiliation without breaking the fragile peace he had built for others. The silence of the room was his confession. He leaned back against the chair, closing his eyes, recalling the boy who had once clung to his hand for guidance. That same boy, now a man, had no idea how much his father had given to pave his way. The thought tightened his chest. He allowed himself one quiet sob, muffled against the wooden armrest. It was not for himself, but for the pain his son would bear witnessing his mother's arrogance. A father's heart aches in silence, and sometimes that pain is heavier than any visible wound. From the small window, he glimpsed the fiancé pacing, wringing her hands, consumed by whispers she could no longer contain. Her figure seemed to shrink with guilt and shame, yet she could not yet reach him. He remained still, unmoved by her desperate postures. His attention was inward, balancing the love he held for his son with the grief for the dignity lost that day. He thought of the countless fathers like him, invisible, uncelebrated, enduring humiliation for the sake of their children. And he realized he was not alone, even in apparent solitude. As night deepened, the estate lights dimmed, leaving the gatehouse in near darkness. The old man remained seated, silent, letting the heaviness of the day settle around him like a cloak. His tears had dried, but the memory would linger, a reminder that respect is not owed by status, but earned by character. Somewhere, he whispered a silent prayer for wisdom, for his son, and even for the woman whose arrogance had revealed so much. And outside, the world continued in blissful ignorance, unaware that the quiet dignity of a man's suffering was teaching a lesson louder than any shout. The first ripple hit her as she walked down the street the next morning, sunlight bouncing off the marble of her heels, yet shadows clung to her every step. Heads turned, eyes widened, and whispers trailed her like vultures circling prey. Even strangers in cars slowed to glance, some smirking, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The world she once commanded with beauty and poise now felt alien, hostile, unforgiving. Each look she met carried judgment she had never imagined. Pride, once her armor, now crushed her chest. She realized reputation could evaporate faster than perfume, leaving only the bitter scent of regret behind. Her friends, the ones who once flattered her in luxury lounges and shared secret gossip over lattes, now avoided her glance. Invitations stopped coming. Calls went unanswered. The social circles she had climbed with effortless charm now acted as if she were contagious, tainted by a single morning's arrogance. Every whispered story exaggerated the slap, turning it into legend. She hit him.
Can you believe it?
His fiancé. Her vanity crumbled, layer by layer, under the public microscope she had ignored. Family gatherings became unbearable. Relatives who once praised her for elegance and good taste now exchanged nervous glances behind her back. Even her parents, mortified by the scandal, cast cautious eyes, afraid the stain of disgrace would tarnish their own names. Every familiar face seemed to silently tally her misstep, judging the woman she had thought untouchable. She had learned, abruptly, that pride can isolate as easily as charm can connect. At work, the fall continued. The promotions she once expected, the recognition she had assumed, now seemed distant, almost impossible. Her colleagues murmured behind hands, casting sidelong looks of subtle triumph. Those she had looked down upon for years now held power over perception, shaping a narrative she could not control. Every compliment once freely given turned to silence, every handshake to hesitation. She had underestimated the fragile threads of influence she had woven, and now they unraveled. Even the children in the neighborhood, who had once waved at her with innocent admiration, began to whisper and point. Her appearance at local shops was met with cold stares. The bakery clerk barely offered a greeting. Her carefully maintained image, glamour, sophistication, authority, crumbled in the eyes of ordinary people. Each slight, each judgment, compounded the humiliation into a weight she couldn't shake. She began to understand. Social grace is earned every day, and arrogance can destroy it in moments. By nightfall, she stood before her mirror, makeup smudged, hair frizzed from nerves and stress, seeing a woman transformed not by beauty but by shame. The reflection staring back wasn't just embarrassed, it was fearful. Her mind replayed the slap, the fiancé's father recoiling, the silent tears of the son she hoped to marry. She saw herself clearly, stripped of pretense. The woman who had thought she ruled the world had lost it in an instant. In the solitude of her bedroom, she sank to the floor, clutching the engagement ring, a symbol now of everything she had destroyed. Pride, arrogance, and thoughtless cruelty had demolished the life she imagined. Outside, the world continued, indifferent yet cruel, teaching her that respect is fragile, reputation even more so. And in that painful stillness, a question gnawed at her soul. Could she ever rebuild what she had so carelessly shattered, or was her fall permanent? Word travels fast in small towns, carried by tongues sharper than knives and whispers that echo louder than shouts. By the afternoon, her hometown had heard the story of the slap, distorted and dramatized at every retelling. Elders shook their heads in disbelief, neighbors shook their fists in judgment, and children repeated the tale with wide eyes, gaping at the arrogance of a young woman who dared strike an elder. Even the marketplace buzzed with her name. The woman who once commanded respect now became a living lesson in humility, her misstep amplified into legend. At the local church, her parents faced quiet condemnation. Friends of the family offered awkward sympathy, their words thick with disapproval. The gossip painted her as reckless, ungrateful, and unworthy of the love she once claimed. Each retelling added layers of moral weight, as if the community itself were balancing the scales of justice. She had not only humiliated an elder, she had stained the family's honor, a concept sacred in a place where reputation often defines legacy. Even her old schoolmates joined the chorus. They whispered about her in crowded spaces, recounting the event with a mix of amusement and outrage. Every exaggeration twisted her image further, transforming a single act into a monumental crime of character. The woman who once shined with beauty and status now flickered in the village's collective memory as prideful, cruel, and dangerous. Each word acted like a slow drip, eroding the pedestal she had built over years. The elders discussed the incident in hushed tones, emphasizing the importance of respecting age and wisdom. Their voices carried authority, and the younger generation listened, wide-eyed, absorbing the lesson she had inadvertently taught. Her story was no longer personal. It had become cultural instruction. The village, as a living organism, had claimed the narrative, turning it into a moral tale that would be passed down for years. Neighbors whispered at their fences, children pointed fingers in alleys, and even distant relatives commented in hushed tones during visits. She became a cautionary tale, the face of arrogance for the community to warn against. The shame she felt in private now multiplied publicly, each day layering new embarrassment upon the old. Her social standing crumbled in the court of collective judgment faster than any official decree could enforce. Even the simplest gestures, once overlooked, were now interpreted in light of her misdeed. A glance, a smile, a passing word, everything was scrutinized. She realized that a single act could define a life in the eyes of many, and the truth, once spread, could rarely be contained. She began to understand the power of perception and the cruelty of collective memory, where a person's entire character could hinge on one moment. By nightfall, the village itself seemed to pulse with her story. Fires in small huts crackled while elders narrated the incident. Young men mimicked the slap, and children whispered the tale to each other before sleep. Her life, once private and controlled, had been consumed by public scrutiny. The lesson was clear and inescapable. Pride has a way of painting one's character for all to see, and the world is always watching, ready to record every misstep. She sat alone in her grand bedroom, the city lights outside blurring through the rain-streaked window. The evening air felt heavy, almost suffocating, pressing down on her chest as though the universe itself had joined in judgment. Her fingers trembled as they held the engagement ring, now a symbol of everything she had destroyed in seconds. Memories replayed relentlessly. The sharp slap, the elderly man's stunned silence, the quiet dignity in his eyes, and the fiancé's son frozen in disbelief. Each image stabbed at her pride, leaving her hollow and shaken. She had underestimated the consequences of a single moment of cruelty. Her mind raced through every insult she had hurled, every motion of arrogance, every flicker of impatience. What had seemed trivial then now loomed monstrous. The realization hit hard. She had not just humiliated a man, she had shattered trust, disrespected a family, and endangered her own future. Regret was no longer an abstract concept. It sat on her shoulders like a stone, heavy and immovable. She whispered apologies into the empty room, her voice choked with desperation, but the words fell into the shadows, unheard and unheeded. Sleep evaded her as memories of the morning's events played like a relentless loop. She envisioned every possible scenario of what could have gone differently, her heart aching at each missed chance for humility. She thought of the people whose respect she had lost, the fiancé's father, her lover, neighbors, friends, and even strangers whose judgment now defined her. Shame intertwined with sorrow, creating a bitter cocktail she couldn't swallow or discard. She felt the gravity of the moment pressing in from all sides, demanding acknowledgement, demanding growth. Her reflection in the mirror offered no comfort. The woman staring back at her had the same features, the same polished look, but her eyes betrayed the storm inside. The glow of vanity had been replaced by the dull ache of conscience. The realization was brutal. Pride can mask truth, arrogance can blind vision, and disrespect can dismantle years of carefully built perception. For the first time, she confronted herself without excuses, without deflections. She saw the raw, uncomfortable truth she had avoided for so long. Tears came, slow at first, then in streams, wetting her hands, her lap, her cheeks. She mourned the trust she had broken, the relationships she had jeopardized, and the dignity she had discarded. Each drop carried the weight of guilt, a tangible measure of the moral debt she now owed. Her chest ached, her stomach knotted, and a hollow emptiness consumed her like a vacuum. This was the pain of realization, the recognition that some mistakes cannot be taken back, only learned from. Her thoughts shifted toward the fiancé, the young man who had trusted her love, who had believed in her character, now standing at a crossroads between devotion and disillusionment. She envisioned his heartbreak, the conflict etched into his features, the disappointment that no explanation could erase. Her own reflection now seemed alien, someone capable of causing deep emotional wounds, someone who had endangered not only her future, but the happiness of those she loved. The gravity of her actions crystallized into a singular, undeniable truth. By the time night fully settled, she understood that the weight of regret was both a punishment and a teacher. The silence of the house mirrored the emptiness inside her, a stark contrast to the chaos she had unleashed in moments. She realized that redemption would require more than words. It would demand action, humility, and time. And as the first faint light of dawn crept into her room, one question haunted her relentlessly. Could she ever earn forgiveness, or had a single act of arrogance permanently rewritten her destiny? The morning sun spilled across the mansion gate, gilding every metal bar with golden light. She approached slowly, each step heavy with the memory of humiliation and the dread of confrontation. The old man sat quietly on his bench, his posture still dignified despite the insult. His eyes, calm but piercing, followed her approach, measuring sincerity in her every movement. Her heart raced as she clenched her hands, feeling the weight of guilt pressing down like the sun itself. Each step carried her closer to the man she had wronged, and with it, the potential for either closure or rejection. Her voice trembled even before speaking, though no words had yet left her lips. Kneeling before him, tears streamed freely, soaking the polished shoes and the hem of her dress. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She sought understanding, a chance to make amends for what she had done. Her shoulders shook with every sob, each one a silent acknowledgement of the arrogance that had cost her so dearly. She realized that true humility was not performance. It was raw, painful, and unfiltered, displayed before those she had harmed most. The old man remained silent, observing the transformation, feeling the sincerity in her posture, her gestures, the quiver of her lips. His silence was not coldness. It was a test, a measure of whether her remorse ran deep or was just another act. The garden around them seemed to pause, the birds chirped softer, the wind holding its breath. Time itself felt suspended, waiting to see if Grace could emerge from the wreckage of pride. Each moment stretched, laden with the possibility of judgment or mercy. Her mind flashed to the fiancé, watching from a distance, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. He saw her vulnerability, her willingness to confront her own faults, and he felt a mixture of hope and hesitation. Could someone who caused such pain truly change? His own love wavered, yet a flicker of optimism ignited as he observed the woman he had once adored now stripped of pretense, her sincerity laid bare in the morning light. The old man finally spoke, his voice steady but gentle, breaking the stillness. Forgiveness was not instantaneous, but the gesture was enough, a nod, a soft word, a smile that acknowledged her effort without diminishing her dignity. She felt the weight lift slightly, a breath of relief mingled with lingering shame. The act of forgiveness became a bridge across the chasm she had created, connecting her remorse with the possibility of redemption. As she rose from her knees, the sun catching her tear-streaked face, she understood that this moment was not about reclaiming the fiancé, not about regaining lost status. It was about acknowledging the humanity of the man she had wronged and the dignity of the choice she now made. True redemption was in service to others, in repairing damage done, in learning humility through action rather than words. The fiancé approached slowly, his steps cautious yet curious. His eyes searched hers, weighing change against history, mistakes against sincerity. In that pause, a fragile tension held them both, a crossroads between past pain and future possibility. Redemption was not guaranteed, but she had shown the first essential step. Courage to confront wrongdoing and humility to accept consequence. The scene at the gate became a visual and emotional climax, where remorse met grace and the door to forgiveness opened just wide enough for hope to step through. The mansion gate stood silent under the late afternoon sun, golden rays glinting off the polished bars, as if nature itself bore witness to the lesson learned. She stood at a distance, watching the old man walk alongside his son, dignity in every measured step. Her chest ached, not from anger or regret alone, but from the deep understanding that pride can blind, arrogance can destroy, and respect is the true measure of character. The streets seemed quieter now, the whispers of the estate hushed, as if even the world paused to reflect on what had transpired. Her reflection in a nearby window caught her attention. Gone was the confident, untouchable woman she had once been. In its place was a humbled figure, face damp with tears, eyes softened by realization. She felt the weight of every misjudged glance, every cruel word she had cast at those she considered beneath her. The memory of that single slap, once a moment of power, now loomed as the catalyst of her awakening. She understood that moments of disrespect carry echoes far longer than arrogance imagines. Around her, life continued. Neighbors moved past, children played, the city carried on. But she noticed subtle changes. People's eyes lingered, some in acknowledgement of her transformation, others as reminders of the folly that had unfolded. The moral of her journey, vivid and unyielding, carved itself into the very air. Humility is earned through action, and dignity is found in treating everyone with respect, regardless of social status or appearance. She finally grasped that her previous sense of superiority had been fragile and fleeting. She thought of the fiancé, now walking with his father, a bond unshaken by her mistakes, yet forever marked by the incident. Love and loyalty, she realized, are not blind. They see character, integrity, and moral truth. The man she had wronged carried her lessons silently, his forgiveness reflecting both wisdom and the strength of restraint. She felt a mix of awe and sorrow, knowing that she had been given a chance few are offered. The opportunity to witness grace in action and to reshape herself from within. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched toward her, symbolizing the journey from ignorance to enlightenment. She inhaled the evening air, a mixture of rain-washed streets and fading sunlight, letting it fill her lungs with a sense of clarity she had never known. Pride had crumbled, vanity had faltered, and in their place, humility and reflection took root. Every heartbeat reminded her that respect, not status, is the foundation upon which trust and love are built. As the gate closed behind the father and son, a profound silence lingered. She realized that life's most enduring lessons are not taught in classrooms or through wealth. They are engraved in moments of consequence, in choices made under pressure, in the respect shown to those society often overlooks. Her journey of humility had begun with a slap, but it ended with understanding. The person you demean today may hold the key to your tomorrow. She whispered to herself, a vow and a warning. Never underestimate the quiet power of dignity.